I think it doesn't matter long term who wins the election. I think short term, a Harris win is negative for Bitcoin short term because people think, oh, Gensler's going to stay and Warren's going to be in power, and that's bad. And it is. But Bitcoin has proven over and over and over again that it can survive all the dumb attacks based on FUD.
This episode is brought to you by Uphold, which is one of the top crypto platforms in the industry. I've been a user of Uphold since 2018. They make it easy to buy, sell, and trade crypto. They have 300 plus cryptocurrencies on their platform, which includes Bitcoin and all the top altcoins. And folks, they do not commingle. They do not lend out your funds. They are 100% reserved, and you can review their transparency report. And they have a lot of great features that make it easy to execute your trades. They also have a great new product called USD interest accounts, which allows you to park your dry powder or your crypto profits and earn up to 4.9% APY. Now, the 4.9% APY is only on balances over $1,000. Below $1,000, it's 2%. But what's great about this product, guys, is there's no lockups, there's no monthly fees, there's no subscriptions, and best of all, it is FDIC insured just like a bank. So if you'd like to learn more about Uphold, visit the link in the description. Welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward, and my guest today is Mark Yusko, who's the founder, CEO, and CIO at Morgan Creek Capital Management. Mark, great to have you back on.
Oh, great to be here and great to celebrate Halloween with you.
Yes.
The 16th anniversary of the white paper, the eponymous white paper from Satoshi Nakamoto. And I don't know if you followed the story earlier today of Faketoshi, big press conference in London, and nobody showed up. And
this guy's ridiculous, Mark.
It's crazy. I mean, it's crazy. It's just, it'd be one thing if the person who claimed to be Satoshi was an actual programmer in C++ and was facile with the technology. But the people who have claimed to be Satoshi just don't fit that bill. So whatever.
Yeah. So Mark, 16 years. Where do you see Bitcoin? Is it a teenager? If we use the
absolutely total teenager. And the thing about teenagers is what I refer to as the potential to capability ratio, right? And so you think about the average teenager, some of them are reasonably capable, but in terms of their potential, that capability is very low relative to their potential. And I used to use an example that I tweeted out a picture of 10-year-old LeBron James. And it looks like any other kid, literally. Wasn't tall, wasn't big, looks like a normal, nice little boy. And I said, well, how much would you pay for the future earnings of this kid? And they're like, oh, that's slavery. I'm like, I'm not talking about slavery. I'm like, just if you could write a contract like David Bowie selling his future record deal in a bond, how much would you pay? And they're like, I don't know. It looks like a normal kid. I'm like, well, okay, if I told you it was LeBron, how much would you pay? Oh, well, I'd pay a lot. Well, yeah, of course. So knowing someone's potential is hard. Knowing someone's capability, right? You say, do this task, and they're either capable or they're not. Like if someone asked Faketoshi to program in C++, you'd say, I forgot. No. So the same thing's true with Bitcoin, right? Yes, we've gone from zero. This is amazing, right? Because, today is the 16th anniversary of conception. And hold on, so it looks like okay, all right. Looked like we had an interloper for a second. So 16th anniversary of conception, but the actual birth was in January of 2009. And, that gestation period between kind of the creation of the white paper and the actual birth, it still came out with essentially no value. right? 0.0001 cent or something like that, or 0.0003 cents. And, there's the famous 10,000 Bitcoin for a pizza and all that, or two pizzas and all that good stuff. But I will argue that those first few years, kind of like an infant, there's not a lot of there. I mean, raising, particularly the first few months of life, there's just not, they eat, they sleep, they poop, they cry. Yeah. It's tough. It's tough. And I think that's what Bitcoin was in those earliest days. So I'll even argue that we're probably a decade-ish into the real kind of period of the S curve and adoption. So S curves over 30 years, you get the first, kind of 20% in that first decade, the next 80%, the first 10% in the first decade, the next 80% in the second decade, and then maturity, the last 10%, those stubborn, curmudgeonly people who say, I'm never going to get one of these things. Like my dad still doesn't have an ATM card, believe it or not, 86 years old. But although he does own Bitcoin. So what's interesting about this is Bitcoin is proven to be capable, right? It functions. It is the most secure computing platform the world has ever seen. It's the most powerful computing network the world has ever seen. It's, 1,500 times more powerful than the CERN supercomputer, which is number 2. So that's pretty capable. Yet the potential is orders of magnitude greater, right? And yes, it's a 1.4 trillion-ish dollar asset, or 1.3. I should know that number, but somewhere in that 1.3, 1.4 trillion. And yet the likelihood that this is a $100 trillion base layer of all value in the future is reasonably likely. And people say, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, what Bitcoin really is, and what Satoshi Nakamoto gave us with his gift. And we said, well, how do you know it's a he? Well, he self-identified as a he one time. So we know it's a he. Now, it could be multiple he's, right? But the person who was typing was a he. So that gift was not just the code of Bitcoin, because a lot of people contributed to that. It wasn't just the idea of Bitcoin. It was this idea and capability of creating a unique asset in the digital world. Because that's an idea that will spawn lots of gigantic businesses. When everything of value, and I do mean everything, every stock, every bond, every currency, every commodity, every piece of art, every collectible car, every case of fine wine, every private business, when everything of value is stored and exchanged using blockchains, and Bitcoin is a blockchain, and I even have a pair of socks that says Bitcoin, not blockchain. I'm like, well, Bitcoin is a blockchain, but I know the point they're trying to make, right? That Bitcoin is the only good blockchain. All this other stuff is not. I'm probably not in that camp, but I do think it is the best base layer and likely to be digital gold, base layer of money, and therefore base layer of value. And if I own a very valuable digital asset, I'm probably going to store it on Bitcoin, right? I'm going to probably inscribe it and pay a transaction fee to put it on the safest, most secure chain, because I think proof of work is superior. So that's a really long answer to your question, is how we doing at 16. So I think we're doing great. I think we should throw a big party. Yeah. I guess in Latin culture, right, it's the 15th birthday, the quinceañera. Right. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's the sweet 16 for us Anglo culture. So is this the sweet 16? I guess the technical sweet 16 will be in January, and we should have a big party around that. But like a 16-year-old birthday party, the best is yet to come. The best is yet.
And Mark, on that note, I feel that over the past year, something significant has happened, or there's been a change in the air. You got these ETF vacuums sucking up all the Bitcoin. You got politicians pitching Bitcoin as a reserve asset. You have companies globally. It's not just MicroStrategy. Companies in Japan adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet. There's people teasing other companies that are teasing that they're going to do it. I think Michael Dell.
Yeah, shameless plug. Look, I'm a board member at Metaplanet. I'm a monster fan of what Simon has done and bringing in Dylan and look, I jumped on that starship the moment Simon invited me, and we will be the MicroStrategy of Asia for sure. And to have Michael Saylor actually comment on that in Forbes the other day was mind-blowing. So pretty cool.
So, Mark, do you think we've crossed the chasm? Like Bitcoin has gone mainstream, TradFi's here, the politicians are on board, and it's just a matter of time?
I mean, 100%, right? And I do agree that this year was a very, very big year. Like that Sweet 16, right? To get your driver's license and all that good stuff and kind of get out of that, little kid phase into not quite adulthood at 18, but it's a pretty big year. But again, the best is yet to come. So yes, we are more mainstream and yes, now there are, pick a number, 250, 300 million holders and users around the world, but that's a fur piece from, the multiple billions that will someday transact in Bitcoin on a daily basis. And I say this all the time. My grandkids are Zoomers, right? They're Gen A's, and they'll never know what this is, right? They'll never have a leather wallet. They'll never have one. They'll never know what paper money is. They will live a digital life, and they'll transact out of their digital wallets, and that's pretty cool. And they may not drive them. Speaking of 16, they may not actually drive themselves when they turn 16, right? They may be driven by technology. But the reason that Bitcoin had such a big year is every incremental year that you survive increases the likelihood you'll survive longer. It's called the Lindy effect. And it also has to do with life expectancy. People, when they look at the life expectancy numbers, say, oh, well, that means people are living longer. Like, well, it does, but what it really means is people aren't dying younger. Right. So when you go back and you look in the 1500s or the 1600s or the 1700s, life expectancy was, 30, 35, 40. It wasn't because no one lived to be 85 or 90. It was that so many people died at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And, we fixed most of that through progress and technology. Not all of it. But that's the thing, is the fact that Bitcoin didn't die every year. Like I'm actually wearing, I'll say, I don't know if I can make it so see. So I'm wearing my, rest in peace Bitcoin socks with the little wings. And, it's got little tombstones on the bottom. One, because it's, Halloween, or Halloween. And two, because for 16 years, at least 30, 40 people a year have declared Bitcoin is dead. And I always say we're going to need a bigger tombstone, because they said it in 09 and we had to cross that out. And they said it in 10, we have to cross that out. And they said it last year and we have to cross it out. And they said it again this year, we have to cross it out. It ain't dead. And it's not going to die, because it should have died in those first couple of years. Yeah. Right. If it was going to die, and if the technology didn't work, and if you couldn't actually have a unique digital asset in the digital realm, it should have died, but it didn't. And the fact is, every year is building on the success of the previous years. And, the ETFs are just a good example, right? An ETF, people say, oh, it's not even Bitcoin. Like, well, no, it's not. No one actually is saying it is. It's a wrapper, right? They call it the boomer wrapper. So for, my brethren and sisterin who don't want to deal with wallets can just buy it. Well, not your keys, not your coins. Right. But anyone have money in the bank? Anyone listening to this podcast have money in the bank? Probably not your money. Oh, no, that's my money. No, it's not. It's the bank's money. And you have an IOU. And if you go to cash in that IOU, most of the time it works, unless you protested the truckers in Canada and they froze your bank account, or unless you were in, Cyprus and you woke up one morning and 3/4 of the money was gone, or like what happened to me the first time I tried to buy Bitcoin directly. Bank of America was like, "Oh no, we're going to keep your money." I'm like, what do you mean? So, well, it says right here, we can hold your money for 2 weeks. I'm like, okay, fine. But in 2 weeks, you're going to have to give it to me. And then I'm taking all my money out, which I did. So I no longer bank with Bank of America. And it's that evolution and more people getting involved. And whether it's the ETF now buying, tens of thousands of Bitcoin on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, or whether it's people like Michael Saylor saying, he just announced he's going to, raise $42 billion, 21 and 21 in equity and debt to buy more Bitcoin. And, the folks at Metaplanet, we're much smaller. I mean, teeny tiny, but we're going to issue bonds to buy Bitcoin. And, all these things make sense if you step back and say, okay, we live in a world where for years we've been sold this kind of bill of goods that to be a functioning member of society, you had to get a job and get paid and save and buy a house and incur a mortgage and get student loans and do all these things. Oh, okay, but let's think about that for a second. So I going to college helped me get a good job. Okay, fine, I'll buy that. But in the old days, you didn't have any debt. And as debt goes up, if you got a lot of debt, then the value of that job you're getting gets reduced, right? So there's this little weird thing there. Then there's the problem of if I'm working for someone else and they're paying me in an asset that then gets devalued over time because the government just prints more of it, isn't that theft, right? Isn't that inflation stealing my wealth? Well, what if I could get paid in this other asset that doesn't devalue? The thing I think that's interesting about Bitcoin is, right, we're celebrating that it got close to near all-time highs again. And it's, this is October, so we're up like 13, 14% in October. So it's up, I think, 15 out of 16 Octobers, which is pretty amazing. Mm-hmm. And I think November is going to be even better, and December could be just lights out. But and we can talk about why. But when I think about all of that, what it really says is people are realizing that one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. Right? Bitcoin actually doesn't change. It's the thing that we all, and when I say we all, meaning global society, chooses to value it in. So in Argentina, the price only goes up because the peso only goes down. Right. In Turkey, the price only goes up because the lira only goes down. In lots of places around the world, mostly where there are dictators, they devalued the currency. That's part of the dictator playbook, because it siphons the wealth up to the tippy top, the all-seeing eye. And you could argue pretty convincingly that, the current Western administrations, broadly speaking, are doing the same thing, right? They're devaluing their currencies. So the people at the top, their donors, keep them in power and get super rich. Because if you borrow in a wasting asset and you have to pay back in dollars that are worth less, and your asset goes up, so speculating in real estate or stocks, or the problem is the average person doesn't own those assets. They rent their home. They don't own stocks. They can't get debt, right? They don't have a high enough credit score to get debt. And so I had this experience. I was at a Bitcoin event in Durham, in the Bull City Bitcoin. And the bartender came over. She was talking to us before the event started, and she was interested. And the guy described it so well. He says, well, you were here a month ago because they have these monthly get-togethers, and you got a bunch of tips, right? Well, those tips are worth less today than when you got them. He said, what do you mean? Well, the purchasing power of those tips went down through inflation. Right. Had you converted those tips to Bitcoin, or had we tipped you in Bitcoin, it would have been better. And she said, well, okay, I need to do that. So she puts up a QR code, and now people can tip her in Bitcoin. And had she done that, right, she would have more money, not less. And so as more people realize that they can opt out, maybe not for all of your money, because again, to be a functioning member of society, we, through belief and custom, have decided that each country will have its own currency. It's not money, it's currency, right? It's paper with no inherent value or intrinsic value backed by debt. I always find it funny, right? In America, we use green pieces of paper, and in Israel, they use yellow pieces of paper, and in China, they use red pieces of paper, and in Europe, they use plastic. Right? It's not even paper. And it's just kind of interesting. But we all have this belief system that if I hand you a green piece of paper, you'll give me some good or service. Well, the problem with that is if I have a green piece of paper and they literally can run a printing press, although they don't do it with paper anymore, they do it with ones and zeros on a computer. And if I had $1 million sitting over here and you printed another $1 million, the value just fell by half. And that's what constantly has happened since the 1600s when the first central bank was created. And Bitcoin solves that problem, right? After all those years, we now have a way where we have a fixed supply. It's even better than gold. Gold, you can go out and dig it out of the ground, or you can mine asteroids for it or whatever. I don't know if they'll actually ever do that, but they say they can. So the value, the volume of gold could go up, maybe even precipitously if you had a big discovery. But we know every day for the next 140 years how many Bitcoin are going to be created. So it's a predictably scarce asset. And look, scarcity, it's kind of the coolest thing ever, right? Think of anything that's scarce, right? How about concert tickets to T-Swift?
Yeah.
Right? My granddaughter is walking around today as T-Swift, right? And that's her thing. She wants to be T-Swift. 6 years old. She looks just like her.
Same with my daughter, 6 years old, same thing.
Yeah. And so, but a ticket, right, that should normally have cost, $50, $75, $150. We're going for tens of thousands of dollars because limited supply, unlimited demand. Okay. I mean, I happen to, through my 13-year-old, play some video games, some card games. So we played Magic the Gathering, right? And there's a video, I love it. This kid got the one of one. Literally, Wizards of the Coast printed one cardboard card, little Magic the Gathering card with the ring from the Lord of the Rings collab they did. And he's videoing it as he unboxes it. And his hands like literally shaking like this because he just made $2.5 million. He actually did sell the card for around that much.
Wow.
People are like, well, that's ridiculous. It's a piece of cardboard. Yes, it is. But there's only one in the whole world. Yeah. People say, I could just go make 1,000 of them. They won't be the same.
Yeah.
I mean, and you can say, no, that's dumb. Or you could say the Mona Lisa being priceless is dumb, but there's only one, and there will only ever be one.
Yeah.
And I'll give it one last thing on this. So I was in the Vatican Museum this past summer. Amazing place, right?
Yeah.
Now, the story of the Vatican Museum is a little less good because the old popes plundered this stuff, right? They literally went out and stole the stuff and extorted it and lent people money knowing they couldn't pay it back so they could take their stuff. Not the nicest men going, but whatever. But so I asked the guide, I said, has anyone tried to value the collection? And she literally started laughing. She's like, Come on, like that one of one priceless artifact. What's the value? That one of one priceless artifact. What's the value? I'm like, yeah, you're right. Because literally, there's one Greek statue of this type with this arm broken. How many people would want that? More than one.
Yeah.
And so it does have an infinite value, and not infinite like, but it's like sports teams, right? I mean, everybody who ever bought a sports team, everyone says, oh, they're idiots. They overpaid. And they always make lots and lots of money because there's only so many sports teams. And there's always someone with a bigger ego who has a bunch of worthless toilet paper, fiat, that they'll exchange to own that sports team and live their glory days.
But Mark, isn't it also that to the point of the sports team and owning some of these things, they know how the system is set up on the fiat currency regime. They
Right.
keep printing, so the asset prices keep going up. So you are, yes, you could love the sports, or you could love the team, and you want to be involved. Like, let's say Mark Cuban. Mark Cuban loves basketball and so
Yeah.
forth, but he just sold it to make a profit. I mean, and I'm sure he understands the money printing cycle, and you can simply
Oh,
do.
he does it. And he's really good at buying other things. You know,
Yeah.
he's been a good venture investor. And look, would he have earned as good or better return keeping the Mavericks forever? Probably. I mean, it's hard for me to envision a world where the value of sports franchises declines. And actually not only not is it not just not decline, but doesn't increase at a higher rate than inflation and other investments because it's so scarce, right? There's only so many and they're not going to make a lot more. That said, if you go way down, it's just the law of large numbers. If you have something worth 100 billion and what's the likelihood it's going to double to 200 or 300 or 400? And it's pretty likely, but what's the chance you could take, that 100 billion and make $100 billion investments and have a bunch of them be 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 baggers? Reasonable. And so I think that's probably what he'll end up doing. Um, so but ultimately this keeps coming back to the same thing, which is value, right? What we all ascribe value to is mostly related to time, right? You and I are spending time trying to create some value by exchanging ideas and having conversation. That's one way of converting time to value. Another way would be I could go do some physical labor, right? I could go dig a ditch, or I could build a fence, or I could paint a mural. Not that I'm an artist, but I could probably fill in the dots, paint by numbers. So anything that you do in life is about converting energy and time into value.
Yeah.
And so one of the cool things about Bitcoin is it is one of the most perfect ways to capture time and value in a point in time and space uniquely. And the network verifies who owns it and what they exchanged for it. And then when you're ready to, sell it forward, it does it again. And you can't change it, meaning one Bitcoin is always going to be one Bitcoin. I bought usually if I'm in my home office, you see the little buy Bitcoin sign behind me. So I bought that using Bitcoin, and that fixed amount of Bitcoin that I used to buy it, the value of that asset has appreciated in relation not just to the fact that it's a scarce asset. It's not the buy Bitcoin sign, but it's a buy Bitcoin sign. Christian made it, but it's not the one. But if I sold it for the same number of Bitcoin, it would be worth meaningfully more than when I bought it. And it's like I saw a great stat yesterday. You know, the average price of a home, right, is at new all-time highs, right?
Mhm.
In dollars. It's at new all-time lows in Bitcoin. That's a cool thought.
Wow. Mark, with all of these things happening from an adoption standpoint, the ETFs, Wall Street is hoarding Bitcoin, companies adding to their balance sheet, countries, Bhutan, El Salvador, and so forth. Do you think that there's going to be maybe 10 years from now, or maybe sooner, another Bretton Woods moment where the world governments have to come together and say, hey, we need to add Bitcoin to the alongside gold
Okay,
because
so it's a really important point. So I think the answer is definitively yes. I think they, meaning the global governments, will resist as long as possible. Look, if you've read the book Snow Crash, right? It's written in 1991. I mean, it's crazy that the guy coined the term metaverse in 1991. And it basically predicted exactly this, right? That the idea of nation states would start to dissipate and things would all merge kind of together. And each nation state will resist that, right? Because, Canada doesn't want to be part of the US and the US doesn't want to be part of Canada and South America. But literally people now are nomadic, work from anywhere, connected. You and I are not in the same place. It used to be if we wanted to do something like this, we had to be in the same place and there was one camera and one microphone, but that's not the way it works anymore. So as the boundaries of the world start to blur, the likelihood that the same way that the countries came together in a post-World War II and said, we got to stabilize things or else everything's going to go down the toilet. Yeah. So let's stabilize around the US dollar, right? Because, we're the young upstart. I mean, people forget, this is crazy. 30 years earlier, right? 30 years was not a long time.
Yeah.
30 years earlier, the sun never set on the British Empire. The pound sterling was the world reserve currency. Mm. We were an emerging market run by gangs, right? The Italians and the Irish gangs were at war and they ran everything, right? They ran the government, they ran commerce, they ran everything. And finally, in 1929, curiously, on St. Valentine's Day, right? The St. Valentine's Day massacre, the Italian gang finally wiped out the Irish gang. And that was the end of gang warfare. And now the mafia has been in charge since then. Mm. And, one gang. But in that 30-year period from 1913 to 1944, a lot happened. Whoa, wait a second. Why is it 1913? Why are you using 1913, Yusko? Well, that's the big thing. The U.S. Central Bank, the Federal Reserve. Mm. Because what that allowed was the creation of fiat currency by this upstart nation run by gangs. And we could paper the world with these green pieces of paper. And we had a plan, right? We had a plan to make the dollar the hegemonic world reserve currency. Now, it only worked because there was this war, which if you go back and read history, you'd say, well, who started the war? Who fomented the war? Why did the war happen? Wait a second. Who were the winners and losers of the war? Okay. But war creates winners and losers. Yeah. Losers being Europe, particularly, the UK, because the UK sowed the seeds of their own demise. They were on the right side of the war, but they were on the wrong side of finance because they had tried to invade, coincidentally, Mesopotamia, right? The Middle East, incurred a bunch of debt, and then they needed help to win the war. Okay. Again, who started the war, who finished the war, all this kind of stuff. But topic for another day. But we came in and said, yeah, we'll save everybody. We'll fix it. In exchange for you got to use forget this pound sterling thing. And I know you've been using the pound sterling for 75 years and you love it and it's fancy and the English language sounds better spoken by someone from the UK. I say if I had a British accent, my IQ points would go up 20. It's incredible. but I don't have an English accent. I can't even do one. So again, that's a long answer to we've had a good run. U.S. hegemony has had a good run. It was exacerbated in 71 when we cut a deal with Saudi and said, all right, here's the deal. We'll protect you at all costs. Doesn't matter what you do to us. Doesn't matter what you do to anybody else. We'll protect you as long as you price all oil transactions in dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Why does that matter? Well, that made the dollar really the hegemonic world reserve currency. And if you think about it, the U.S. is only about 8% of global trade because we don't have that big a population, right? And yet it's 60 odd percent of global currency. That doesn't make any sense. And that number has been shrinking because, one by one, China, Russia, others have started to move off. Now, the first two, it didn't work out so well. So Iraq said they were going to get off the dollar. And Saddam, exit stage left.
Yeah.
Gaddafi in Libya said, I'm getting off the dollar. He got whacked.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying they were absolutely tied. Well, yeah, I am. But so you didn't threaten, it's like the song, right? Don't spit on Superman's cape. I tug on Superman's cape or spit into the wind.
Wasn't also that we had atomic bombs back in the day after World War II?
That too, which again was created by an interesting group of scientists that we cajoled to come to the U.S. under, some interesting stuff. But look, there's some great books on that whole period of history that lay it out in chapter and verse. But at the end of the day, we won. Mm-hmm. Well, now, through this innovation called Bitcoin, we are going to have that Bretton Woods moment. And yes, the incumbents are going to fight tooth and nail. Mm-hmm. Because, look, the internet, right, that we're using right now to talk, busted the monopoly that was enjoyed for hundreds of years by media and commerce.
Yeah.
Busted it wide open, right? Citizen journalism has now replaced, the woke media, and, commerce can be between peer to peer, and we don't need middle people. We use middle people, like Amazon's just a big search engine, and they're great, but it's just a search engine. They don't actually make stuff. So not a company the way we think of companies, but they're a massive network and very valuable. But going forward, what people are realizing is Bitcoin bust, and blockchains broadly bust financial services. Financial services is the biggest industry in the world, bar none. I mean, there's nothing close.
Right.
And stocks, bonds, currencies, commodities, because people think the stock market's big. Well, the bond market is 10 times as big as the stock market. And the currency market's another 10 times as big, so 100 times as big. So these are big, big, big markets. And $7 trillion a year of expense to you and me and everybody else, but that's profits and revenues and ultimately profits to the companies. So they don't want this to go away. So they are actually, coined a term for this the other day, incumbent cyanide, right? So incumbency plus cyanide. And that's why FUD exists, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? It's why they spread malicious rumors that the technology is bad for the environment or bad for this or is used for drug trafficking. And you want to know what the biggest money laundering tool in the world is? It ain't Bitcoin. It's the US dollar by far. And it's not close. I mean, it's not close. It's like 99% to 1.
Yeah.
So that's it. You want to know what, child trafficking is done in? Not Bitcoin, dollars. And it's not close. So all the horrific things occur with the eponymous world reserve currency. Now, if Bitcoin were the world reserve currency someday, maybe then all the bad stuff would happen with that too, because unfortunately, bad stuff's going to happen because humans are going to human.
Right.
And look, it's better today than it's ever been. yet still really, really bad. And there's still a lot of things we got to fix. But, we all live better lives today than we ever have.
Right.
And not everybody, but generally speaking,
yeah.
there are fewer people in abject poverty. There are fewer people with chronic disease. There's less infant mortality. So many things that are positive. Do we have lots of work to do? Absolutely. Do we have simple problems like having actual leaders in government? Yeah, that'd be a good start. And term limits. But we can fix some of that on Tuesday, hopefully. So, yeah.
Speaking of Tuesday, what are your thoughts on President Trump and even Senator Cynthia Lummis putting out the proposal to make Bitcoin a U.S. Treasury Reserve asset? Do you think that is close?
Look, Cynthia Lummis is awesome, and she's been awesome for a long time. The Donald is an opportunist. He's maybe the greatest opportunist, not the great, he's one of the greatest opportunists ever. And he saw the opportunity, right? He got the invitation to Bitcoin 2024, and he said, all right, I'll go speak. There's like, how many people own Bitcoin? Okay, that's a lot of voters. Okay. And he said all the right thing. My favorite part, on my first day, I'll fire Gary Gensler. And the place went crazy. Like even he was surprised how crazy it went. I said, I'm going to say that again. On my first day, I'll fire Gary. And the place went crazy. And when he said, I'll make a strategic reserve, I won't sell the Bitcoin. All right. I'll actually put it in a trust, and then it'll go up in value, and then I'll owe less money on the debt. Novel concept. Look, the only thing I ever agreed with W when he was president, I like W now. I think he's a really cool guy. But as a president, I didn't like him, and I didn't agree with anything he said, except he did say we should take Social Security and put it in stocks. Now, his timing was bad. It was at the market peak in 2000, but the idea was right, right? We should invest Social Security in assets like stocks, like Bitcoin, like venture capital, because then it wouldn't be a pay-as-you-go system, because pay-as-you-go systems eventually break. Yeah. Look, when they set it up, there were 17 retirees for every worker. I'm sorry, 17 workers for every retiree. Great system. When I turned retirement age, I used to joke that, there'll only be two. That means I lose. My two kids choose between me and my wife. My wife gets all the money. So I had to have another kid. So we had another kid. We didn't have four, but we did have. So I at least got one. He's only 13, but he's got a long life ahead to support his dad. But the key is that the pay-as-you-go system doesn't work. Temasek and GIC have figured out how to make it work by investing. But that's, again, topic for another day. So I do think this election is really important, because I do believe Bitcoin is a single issue that you should cast your vote on. And why? Well, that seems rather hyperbolic. Well, I am prone to hyperbole, but I don't think this is actually hyperbole, in that of all the things that are truly important, it's the ability to foster innovation and wealth creation. That's the most important thing for a country. If you look at all the failed states, they lack that. They try to restrict that. They try to keep it at the top with the few people, cronyism instead of capitalism, and even worse, socialism and Marxism or communism. And it doesn't work, right? We know the best form of anything is capitalism and encouraging wealth creation and innovation. And so it's abundantly clear right now. And, it's funny because I'm a lifelong quote unquote, I'm registered independent, but I'm a lifelong Democrat believer, in that I believe there should be a social safety net. I believe there should be, incentives that are aligned and all this good stuff. But the current version of that party is not at all resembling anything that I could ever support. I mean, if you read their tenets, this is crazy. If you read the 10 points from the DNC and you read the Marxist manifesto, 7 of the 10 are almost word for word. I'm like, that's wow. That's a wow. And now people say, oh, but Trump just lies. He's just saying stuff to say stuff. Yeah, that's true. Donald cares about Donald, and Donald cares about Donald's family and getting rich.
Right.
But in so doing, the things that he has said now out loud that he agrees with are things that are pro-business, pro-innovation, pro-inclusion, meaning financial inclusion, as opposed to exclusion using fiat. So all of those things, I think, make it a very clear choice. Now, we'll see what happens, but I am hopeful that logic prevails. And I think if people get beyond the rhetoric and focus on, like, there are other things. There are certain things that certain people are going to vote. Like, their abortion, that's their only thing. That's all they care about. God love them. That's their thing. Okay. But if you care about finance and commerce and growth and prosperity, which that's what I do for a living, so that's what I care about, then I think it becomes abundantly clear that we need a different direction than the one we're in. Now, I actually believe it doesn't really matter who's president. Quite honestly, what really matters is who controls the lawmaking body, Congress. So we need that to shift away from the craziness we have right now. But
to your point, I mean, we're seeing more Democrats working with their Republican colleagues. They got their Fit 21 bill out of the House. There's talks of getting one through the lame duck session in the Senate. I mean, you got Chuck Schumer not aligning with Elizabeth Warren. That's a great sign.
Oh my God, so awesome. No, and that's the thing. The whole left-right thing is kind of funny, right? Because the original party, right, if you've watched Hamilton, right, they were called Democratic Republicans.
Yeah.
Right? Versus the Federalists. So, you got the Federalists who wanted state, 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 state. And then you had these Democratic Republicans who wanted a republic, which is what we got. And we live in a republic, right? We don't live in a democracy. We live in a republic. Now, it's a democratic republic, which is good. But what that means is you should have people who are more centrist, but we've now polarized everything. And so you got these two fringe groups who are crazy on both sides, and we've lost the middle. Yeah. So the middle doesn't vote, which is kind of sad. And the great leaders of our time, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, you say, I didn't say they were good people.
Right.
I said they were great leaders.
Yeah.
Because great leaders, John F. Kennedy, they lead from the middle. And I think Schumer is actually an example of someone who said, you know what? I'm tired of being way out here. I'm going to come more in here because it's more logical. Right. And, maybe he's not as far to the middle as I would like, but middle is where it's at. Rand Paul types and others that, at the end of the day, it's actually kind of genius and actually extraordinary that a bunch of 20-somethings, now we call them the founding fathers, but most of them were barely fathers. Yeah. They were kids, and there were a few old guys, but most of them are kids, and yet they had vision that they codified in some rules that have stood the test of time and still make really good sense about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I mean, that's ultimately, liberty is a really important word there, and freedom of speech and freedom of the press and right to bear arms and all these things, they're so central and so simple, but they get so politicized. And if we just come back to the central area, and it's like, well, let's just take guns. And look, I'm not an automatic weapon proponent. I don't think everybody needs 100 magazines. I don't. And I know people, oh yeah, of course we do. I'm like, yes, some portion of people need to have the same armament as the military so that we can't be taken over by the military. That I get, right? But the average person doesn't need that, right? I'm not going to hunt with an automatic weapon. But I think it's anyone's right to have those.
Mm-hmm.
And by supporting that right, then maybe they'll support my right to say what I think or say what I feel. And even if they disagree with it, which again is a fundamental right and privilege of living in the greatest country ever. So
Yeah. In full agreement with you there. I did want to get your thoughts on what you think is going to happen this Q4 for Bitcoin. If you have a price prediction, and do you see the?
I do. Look, I think it doesn't matter long term who wins the election. I think short term, a Harris win is negative for Bitcoin short term because people think, oh, Gensler's going to stay and Warren's going to be in power, and that's bad. And it is, but Bitcoin has proven over and over and over again that it can survive all the dumb attacks based on FUD. But short term, I think that would be bad. Long term, it's actually probably better because that side has drunk the Kool-Aid of the cult of Kelton, and they believe that MMT works and that you can print as much money as you want and give money to all your cronies. So they're going to keep doing that, right? I mean, the fact that we are still sending billions, tens of billions of dollars to Ukraine in what's just a blatant money laundering operation. I mean, it's as blatant as the nose on your face, and yet we're still doing it. And that has to be financed. And the only way to finance it is to print money, which is to devalue. And that's why I just paid, like $18 for lunch, instead of 10. So that means that one Bitcoin priced in dollars will be much higher. So long term, if the Democrats stay in charge, moonshot. Now,
so are you seeing a blow off top by Q2 or so?
Yeah. So look, I think the 4-year cycle applies, right? And so, we're at the final stage of the parabolic move. So post having about 178 days out, you get a big move, which we just had. And then in the next kind of 120 days, you get the total parabolic. And that's because everybody's going to be home at Thanksgiving talking about it. And then everybody's going to try to buy it. And then the ETFs are going to buy it. And buying begets buying. And I think we go truly parabolic. I said, maybe you get a short-term down and then a super spike with Harris. If Trump wins, I think it's just straight up. Now, it probably doesn't go as high, as far, as fast because he has talked about cutting the budget deficit and, getting Elon Musk to be the, I love it, the Doge, right? The Department of Government Efficiency.
Right.
And it's interesting because, Doge, Italian word, comes from the guys in and around the people who invented the system that we're trying to tear down, the Medicis, back in the Middle Ages with the Doges. So I think that's just kind of interesting. But probably unrelated, but it is interesting. So I do think it doesn't matter who wins, long-term, the price is up. So between now and kind of middle of October or middle of December, I think we're definitely into 6 digits. I think we're definitely how high, 110, 120, just depends how much crazy. If you remember, in 17, we went from 10,000 to 20,000 in about 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And then on December 18th, they allowed futures and we went down. Because again, what's happening, and you can see it on your clock behind you, the price is going down. Well, why is the price going down? Everybody's buying. We had set record for new buys. Remember, a lot of those buys, particularly by the hedge funds and the traders, they're shorting the future against it. So they're pushing the price down so they can buy it cheaper, right? Dirty little secret on Wall Street. If you like something, you don't tell everyone you like it. You tell everyone you hate it. And then you go out and buy more of it. So they're pushing the price down on futures. And that's why in 17 and then 18, we had the bear market all the way down to 3,000. So then in 21, we were at 13,000. We went to 60,000 by mid-February before Elon tweeted that he wasn't going to accept it for cars. And then we dropped 50%. And then it went up 100 back to all-time highs before the bear market. And so I think that's where it changes. So sometime first quarter next year, second quarter next year, we get the next bear cycle. There will be another bear cycle. And the depth of the bear cycle will depend on how high the blow-off top is, because fair value is just going to keep accreting. Fair value today, probably in the 80s, somewhere like that. By middle of next year, it'll probably be closer to 100. And that's just the Metcalfe's law value of the network.
Right.
But if we go to 150 or 160, then we're definitely going to crash. And we'll go right through fair value, as we are prone to do. Now, do we go down 84% or 83% or 67%? I don't know. It all depends on how much leverage gets in the system, because ultimately that's what determines the cycles. When the price is below fair value, the investors come in. People like me who like to buy things below fair value. That's our job. Then as the price starts to get towards fair value, the traders come in. And traders don't care about fair value. They just want movement. Well, then as you get above fair value, the speculators come in. Well, why do the speculators come in? Because the hedgers, once it's above fair value, they will sell. And a speculator is just the opposite side of a hedger, right? So the miners hold until it gets above fair value, then they sell. Well, then the gamblers come in. And the gamblers, all they see is a price going up. They just buy it on margin and they hope they can get out before it goes down. And then it just unwinds the same way.
Now, in addition to the Bitcoin ETF and the Ethereum ETF, you got Solana ETFs being filed for, XRP ETFs, but those are a bit tricky because of Gensler and the SEC and all the lawsuits and everything. Do you think if Gensler is out and let's say Trump wins and a Republican SEC chair comes in, some of those lawsuits are going to be dropped and some of these ETFs will get approved?
Yes, I do. I think the problem with them, though, is, I said, ETFs are really a boomer wrapper. And boomers kind of get digital gold.
Yeah.
Right? Because we all get gold. I say this all the time. Ask someone over 35, who's your broker? I don't know, Merrill Lynch, UBS, why? How much gold do you have? I don't know, 3-4%. How much Bitcoin do you have? Oh my God, zero. It's a Ponzi. Haven't you heard that Peter Schiff guy? How often use DeFi? What the hell is DeFi? Ask anyone under 35, who's your broker? What do you mean? What's a broker? I mean, I got a Robinhood account. How much gold do you have? Oh my God, Boomer rocks, zero. Haven't you heard that Peter Schiff guy? How much Bitcoin do you have? I don't want to talk about it. Why not? It's like a really big part of my net worth. I'm kind of embarrassed. How often do you use DeFi? Every day. So the digital divide is real.
Yeah.
And so what is likely to happen is these other ETFs will get approved, but the people who have the wealth, right? The boomers, right? The boomers have $39 trillion of wealth, which is all going to go to y'all, right? It's all going to go to the echo boomers and the Gen Zs when we all pass, because we're all going to pass. And it's going to go to you, and you're not going to leave it in stocks and bonds and currencies. It's going to convert. So that'll be a big upward move. But in the short run, my dad, right, who's at the front end of the boomers, and I'm the tail end of the boomers, he didn't care about Ethereum. He didn't care about Solana. He didn't care about SWI. He didn't care about transaction speeds. And all he wants is digital gold. Yeah. I get that. I like that. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just don't think there's the natural demand for these other things. And the people who do understand this, they don't have a lot of money. I mean, some of them have made good money. Don't get me wrong. There's some people who made a lot of money. But on average, kid coming out of college with debt and, first job, they don't have a ton of money.
Right.
And so, yes, they will speculate in these ETFs because they can buy it in their Robinhood account and don't have to worry about keys and all that kind of stuff. But I just don't think there's the same type of institutional demand. Now, if we solved the argument between Ethereum, Solana, Sui, and a handful of others of Avalanche as to which one truly is the best smart contract platform, that one I think could get some winning, because smart contracts are going to rule the future.
Yeah.
The ability to hard code criteria for payments, for transfers, for conversions of bonds into equity, for all kinds of financial services. I use the simple example, you and I make a bet about a football game this weekend, and I'll always forget, right? And so you got to track me down to get your, steak dinner, which is usually what I bet. And with a smart contract, the game's over and you're paid, right? Yeah. It's why, when election polls close, we should know the winner. None of this, it's going to take 2 weeks. No, we have a solution. It's called blockchain. Yes. One person, one vote, right? No early and often like Chicago, no multiple dead people voting, no, none of this, no lost ballots in the swamp, no hanging chads. One person, one vote on an IP address using a personal identifier linked to a blockchain. We could solve all of the voter fraud allegations tomorrow, literally tomorrow. But they, meaning the people in power, are not going to do that, because one way to stay in power is to manipulate the vote, and that's as old as time, and that's both sides, right? I used to complain about the Republicans rigging the election. Now I complain about the Democrats rigging it, because it's just in and out. In fact, I will argue there are no Democrats or Republicans. There's no left and right. There's in and out. And when you're in, you do or say whatever it takes to stay in. Yeah. Because power is good. When you're out, you do or say whatever it takes to get in. Take DJT, lifelong Democrat, hung out with many of the people we're all, demonizing, right? Yeah. And now he's the savior of the Republicans. But that was Ron Reagan, lifelong Democrat. And he's like, well, I can't win as a Democrat. I can win as a Republican. Okay, I'm a Republican now. So it's in and out. Yeah. And once you're in, people change. And power, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and power is a drug and all that good stuff. But
I can't wait till we get voting on the blockchain and even campaign finance, because the system as is right now, as you're saying, it's not sustainable, and people are getting frustrated. Why are these people not doing, thinking of us? Well, they're thinking
totally broken. Let's talk about Ms. Warren, right? It cost $100 million to become a senator. John Deaton, way more qualified to be senator in Massachusetts than Elizabeth, for lots of different reasons. I mean, the guy's amazing. Doesn't have $100 million. I mean, he's done fine, but he doesn't have $100 million. Meg Whitman had it. She tried. She lost. Spent $103 million of her own money. So the average person running for Senate has to raise the money. If you raise $100 million from other people, you owe them. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, if you are the most moral person in the world, you owe them. And you will do things, and it's sad to say, you will do things that you have to do because you're told, I gave you this money, you must do this. Mm-hmm. And Ms. Warren has been bought and paid for forever, right? She didn't have $100 million. Now she's gotten super rich while she's been in office, but she did not have $100 million. I mean, AOC had negative net worth when she got elected. Like literally negative $9,000 net worth. Now she's worth $13 million. Now that's not all the money in the world, but it's a lot more than negative 9,000. Yeah. Where'd that come from? Not from her salary. So my favorite, the world's greatest day trader, Nancy Pelosi. I mean, it was amazing. She got asked live.
Oh my gosh.
She was voting on this bill as the head of the finance committee. That was gonna, if it passed, it basically would have cut Visa's value in half. And if it didn't pass, it was probably going to go up a lot because, people would say, okay, now the risk. And clearly she was going to vote for it not to pass. And the reporter said, do you think it's okay for you to manipulate the vote on a company where you and your husband are major shareholders? She goes, absolutely. That's part of my compensation.
Mark,
I was like,
it blows my
my
mind.
head wanted to explode. I'm like,
Yeah.
but I was like, okay, damn straight for being truthful. I
Mm.
mean, I'll give you some props for that. I mean, I think you're evil, but I'll give you props for that. And I'm like, wow. And now on the flip side, she's actually a really effective senator. She's done some really amazing things. So it's not that I'm a hater completely. I hate that. I hate that part of it. But, Ms. Warren's never gotten a bill passed. Not
Mhm.
one.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, how is that even possible?
Crazy.
Like, you put your name on enough bills, one of them somewhere should have passed just by luck. But, you got to be talented to go over.
Hmm. It's crazy, Mark. And well, at least to your point, we have the solution, we have the technology. Maybe it's the generational shift that needs to take place for this to
It's
all.
coming. Look, it's all coming. And I get it. People in power like to be in power. And so they're not going to do or support anything that takes them out of power or loosens their clutch on the power. And so, no campaign finance reform unless, the young people figure. And the one thing I love is there was a great video, and it wasn't this election, it was the last election, um, of Joe Biden at 35 yelling, like literally yelling at the congressmen and senators on the floor about how it was time to pass the torch
Mm.
from you old people to us young people.
Wow.
And then you got this, 80 something year old running and like, have you watched your own video?
Yeah,
Like,
right.
dude, Pete Buttigieg is way better than you
Yeah.
on every level. He's a Rhodes Scholar. He's super smart. He's super talented, way better. And he won Iowa and was about to debate Big Joe. And then he's like, oh, I retire. Well, what? Why are you retiring? Well, someone told me to retire. So I get it, right? I understand why they went that way, but I'm flabbergasted by one, how orchestrated it is, and two, how ineffective it is. But if your goal is not to be effective, if your goal is to preserve the wealth at the top, they're actually pretty effective at that. So, and okay, I was on a long flight home from Dubai the other day, and I decided, okay, it's time to watch Napoleon. And, great acting and great story. But truly, truly dazzling to watch humans rise up knowing that a whole bunch of them are going to die. Like literally, it's not like protesting and getting put in handcuffs and carted off to jail. And, no, these people literally, with pitchforks and died. So, I mean, and I'm not calling for revolution. I'm not calling for civil war, but I'm saying, there does come a point at which we need to foment change, and I think we're there, and I think we have a good shot through nonviolent means. Vote with the pen, so to speak,
And
um,
your money, but Bitcoin.
and to opt out, right? And that's how I do, right? I mean,
Yeah.
my peaceful protest is I have an ever increasing amount of my net worth in this, thing that is immune. As a biology and chemistry guy, that's my thing. I am immune from the virus that has infected that whole system. And if you say, if you hate America so much, why don't you move? I don't hate America at all, right? I'm a super patriot.
Hmm.
What I hate is the confiscation of wealth through the stealth tax of inflation and the impingement of people's, rights and privileges
Right.
that I think they deserve, and just for the benefit of power. So, and I think the way to fix all of that is through free and open and fair elections and free speech and all that good stuff. So,
Mm.
and for the most part, we have most of it. Every now and then, it gets trampled on. I'm still in Twitter jail. And if Elon is watching this show, which I wish he were, I've been in Twitter jail for 2 years. I've had 155,400 followers for 2 years, the exact same number. Some days it goes up one or two, some days it goes down, but I've had the same number for 2 years because I liked some stuff that, the police before he came in and fired everybody, didn't like, right? I was against the, forced vaccination. I was against, some of the political leanings and, it's my own fault, I guess, because I, in an open forum, voted with my like. But someday I'll get out of Twitter jail, but it's kind of funny.
Wow. I know I kept you over time. I have a question about Morgan Creek Capital Holdings. I know last time we spoke, Bitcoin, Solana, AVAX. Have you added anything else like SWI or so forth?
We are actively looking at SWI. We looked at it not a long time ago. We looked at it a while ago, and we should have pulled the trigger, but we didn't. So bad on us. What else? We've done a couple things. We have a little teeny tiny position in a alternative DEX called Orca. That one hasn't worked out. We made an investment a couple years ago in something called 1inch, a DEX of DEXs.
Yeah.
And that just hasn't gone the way we would have liked it to go. We haven't sold any more Solana, so there's information content in that. We haven't bought any more, but we haven't sold any. We're big investors with something called Figure. And so we just invested in Provenance Labs, which has the hash token. So it's a little something off to the side. They're trying to create, tokenization platform for real assets. Probably missing something. That's about it.
Doing anything with stablecoins? It seems there's a lot.
Lots of stuff with stablecoins. So we've invested in a couple companies that help other companies create stablecoins. We've invested in a handful of companies that are using stablecoin rails to allow remittances. We did a really cool thing with something called Outlier Ventures, where we sponsored an incubator. And we got, a few hundred applications. We narrowed it down to a dozen, and then we had a bake-off, and we backed 5 startups, and it's all focused in Latin America.
Wow.
And we ended up with one in Peru, one in Brazil, one in Argentina, one in Mexico, and maybe one in El Salvador or Colombia. I can't remember the last one. But really cool. A lot of that has to do with stablecoin rails. Talked to a really interesting company actually yesterday that is trying to build out, an institutional version of money transmitter business, because most of like Bitso and the big, Latin American exchanges, it's mostly individuals, $10 here, $100 there, $1,000 there. What you really need to help are, all these gigantic corporations that are moving operations to Latin America to move stuff into the US for the nearshoring. I mean, that's hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars of capital that could be much better deployed on stablecoins. So I think that's a big opportunity. I mean, stablecoins are going to replace SWIFT. Now, SWIFT doesn't like that. And the problem is that if stablecoins replace SWIFT, then the US government can't sanction people because they can't control who gets access to the stablecoin. So, it's probably not a surprise that the BRICS have announced a big program for creating stablecoin transactions it's up to 32 members now, from the original 5.
Yeah. And,
at some point you can't ignore the vast majority of people on the planet. So I think that's pretty cool.
So Mark, on that note, and this is a hard question, is the US dollar world currency reserve status at risk here with
It's at risk, but it's at risk over time. So the same way that it took 31 years for the pound sterling to finally cede power to the dollar, maybe it doesn't take 31 years, maybe it takes 20 years or 20, let's say it takes 21. It takes 21 years to get to Bitcoin, to keep on the 21 theme. And maybe we're, 5, 8 years into that, maybe a third of the way through.
Or do you feel that if the United States gets stablecoin legislation soon and they are backing like Circle and the other issues like PayPal and so forth, and these stablecoins are able to make it into other parts where people want the US dollars, they could help combat that?
That would absolutely slow that process down. But I think their arrogance is, they're going to say, well, we want our own CBDC. No, you don't get control of my money.
Yeah.
You should participate in a stable coin where your worthless fiat backs that stable coin. And then there'd be demand for your bonds, which no one else wants to buy. Tether is now the third largest owner of US treasuries in the world. Crazy. So yes, they could adopt that. To your point, it's a great point. Will they? Probably not. No, again, maybe, because the one thing I am certain, right? And I always say my wife's only seen me speak one time. And at the end of the talk, she says, Mark, you can't say things like that. Like, well, what'd I say? She says, no, not what you said, how you say it. Like, what do you mean? She says, well, you say things so forcefully. Well, what's wrong with that? She says, well, people will believe you. Like, well, that's kind of the idea. She says, well, what if you're wrong? I'm wrong all the time. I just changed my mind. So I am not certain about a lot of things. I mean, she would remind me that I'm frequently wrong, never in doubt. I say occasionally wrong, never in doubt. I am occasionally wrong. Hopefully not frequently, but I am occasionally wrong. But I changed my mind. And I don't think there's any weakness in that. I think it's actually a strength. Yeah. So the ultimate issue here is for the dollar to maintain, its hegemonic reserve status, it would have to be superior as a store of value to the alternative, right? And I will argue it doesn't have that nature because of the fact that you can print more of it. So ultimately, I think we transition away from that dollar hegemony, but I just think it takes time, and I think it'll be incremental, right? It'll be, certain companies adopt it, certain companies say, oh, okay, that worked. The fact that Microsoft shareholders got to vote on whether they should own Bitcoin on their balance sheet is kind of interesting, right?
Yeah. Mark, it seems to be changing at a rapid pace. It's speeding up with all these technologies, blockchain, crypto, AI. And I wonder, your granddaughter, my daughter, 6 years old, the world they live in will be so different, and hopefully
so different. But look, that's why, people like yourself who continually put out a stream of good information and thoughtful dialogue and debate in search of truth, because that's ultimately what this is about. So listeners are grateful for that. I'm grateful to be a part of it. And, it'll be fun to come back kind of post-election and do a analysis of where we are for the new year.
Let's do it at 100,000. I think that would be a really
all right. We'll do a celebration.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you.
All right.